Good evening, everybody. Shalom Aleichem and good Erev Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining me on this Erev Shabbos Shoftim. So I want to actually begin with a disclaimer, an apology perhaps. I have titled this drasha as I typically do, and the title is a little misleading. I hope that nobody here because you were expecting to hear something maybe a little more controversial than you're actually going to hear. I entitled the drasha Torah's Double Standard. Of course, when we hear the expression double standard, there's a sort of a common typical way of understanding what that means. The truth of the matter is, I'm not speaking about a double standard in that sense. I hope that you will appreciate, and it won't take long to appreciate, why it is that I gave this drasha that title. But we're not really going to talk about double standards in the traditional sense. I would like to talk, however, for a few minutes about the king and one specific aspect which is highlighted in the Torah in this week's Parshat. The Torah in Parshat Shoftim talks about the role of a king, a Jewish king. And the Torah tells us some of the laws, the expectations, and the limitations that apply to a king. And the Pasuk says, "V'hayachish shivto al kisei mamlachto," when the king is actually sitting, literally or perhaps figuratively, on his throne during the reign of a king, v'kasav lo es mishnei haTorah hazos al sefer milufnei hakohanim alaviyim. The Torah tells us that the king is to have commissioned the writing of two Sifrei Torah. Mishnei Torah Azo, says Rashi, means that these are Shtei Sifrei Torah, two Sfarim, V'hayasa imo, and it is to be with him, V'karavo kol yom yimei chayav, and he will read from it all the days of his life. So Rashi explains over here, what's happening is, one Sefer Torah is with him at all times. One of them is Nechneses V'yotzei Simo, goes with him with wherever he goes, in and out, whenever he's traveling. It's obviously a very light, portable Sefer Torah. And Achas Shehimunachas Bebeis Genazov. Says Rashi, one Torah, the other Torah, is placed in a very, very secure location, probably the place where the king would keep all of his gold and silver and other precious treasures. So the Torah, the second Torah, is to be placed there. So here the Torah says that a king is to have not one but two Sifrei Torah. And the question is why? Later on, in the end of Sefer Devarim, the Torah tells us it's actually the last mitzvah in the Torah, that everyone is expected to write or at least commission the writing of a Sefer Torah. We're not going to talk about that right now, but that obligation, understandably, is that one Torah per person. Over here, the king has to have two. And the question is, why does he have to have two? So I'd like to share a very interesting thought with you, one that I think will be relevant not only to the kings among us, but to us common folk as well. Perhaps we can walk away with something that's a meaningful thought, and particularly as we are now just moments from beginning the month of Elul. So what is the role of a king, a Jewish king in particular? What exactly are his obligations? How does he serve the people? So if you take a look at the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, so the Rambam describes the different roles and expectations, the obligations, if you will, of a king. The king is to be obviously a military leader. He is a figure of state. He's a diplomat. He represents the people. But there's an additional element which may be actually surprising to some of us. You know, when we think about a king, we think about a very, very important, prominent individual. And for the most part, this individual is, we would say, out of touch. That the common individual on the street does not really have access to a king. If you want to make an appointment, you can't just call him, call the palace and make an appointment to see the king. It doesn't work that way. Says the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim Perek Beis Halacha Vav regarding the king, it is expected that the king is somebody who will be gracious and compassionate, concerned and involved with not only Gedolim, prominent individuals, but Ketanim as well. Says the Rambam, he should be preoccupied with their interest, with their welfare, that the king is not somebody who's supposed to be isolated in literally an ivory tower, separate and apart from the people. Rather, is to be involved in their lives. The king is supposed to be concerned even about the kavod, the dignity, the honor, the respect that is due to the lowest person in society. Says the Rambam, when he speaks publicly and addresses the people, he should speak with humility and a soft manner. These are some expressions that are found, but I encourage you to take a look at the entire halach inside, because I'm only reading certain highlighted excerpts. The Rambam basically says that the king is supposed to be involved with the people, accessible to the people. It is his job to meet the needs of the people. And so he's going to be exposed naturally over time to all of the fears and the concerns and the weaknesses and the struggles of his constituents. And understandably, at times he's going to feel very frustrated that there are so many problems that he can't fix, so many issues that can't be resolved. And it is possible that there will be moments when he finds himself so desperately trying to rescue individuals from their despair, or perhaps a group of individuals from isolation, that he may unintentionally compromise the laws of the Torah. And suddenly, the integrity of the values, the beliefs, the principles, and the mutable law of the Torah have been threatened. And we're not talking about major changes overnight. We're not talking about a king who is coming to reform and suddenly introduce his radical beliefs or thinking. This is something which is a lot more subtle than that. We're talking about a king who really just wants to promote the welfare of the people that he is dealing with. But because it is his job to deal with the Ketane Ketanim, the people who are going to have some very difficult and challenging personal challenges, so the Torah is concerned. So what's going to happen with the Sefer Torah, literally and perhaps figuratively, that the Melech, is going to be carrying with him at all times? Over time, it may become compromised. Over time, it may be exposed to the elements of the day, to the ideas, to the philosophies, to the concerns, and to the expressions of progressive interest that are very common among people, particularly those who are struggling in life. And so therefore the Torah addresses this by essentially instructing the king to have two Sifrei Torah. One Sefer Torah I'm going to have with me at all times. The king is going to take it with him whenever he leaves the palace, whenever he's interacting with people. He has a Torah, and that Torah is to remind him, obviously, how to handle himself, how to guide the people in every situation. On the most simple level, it could literally be used as a textbook, but more importantly, it is a very powerful reminder to the Melech, not only to remember his place and to demonstrate humility at all times, but to remember that when guiding the people, he has to remain faithful to the Torah. But it is only natural that over time, that Torah that he carries with him from one place to another may become compromised. It is only to be expected that over time it may become a little tainted, it may become a little dulled, it may even become contaminated. There may be exposure to things which will unfortunately compromise the sort of ideal integrity of a Torah as the king gets distracted by some of the very real pressing issues of the day. And so therefore, by requiring the king to have not just one, but two Sifrei Torah, by requiring the king to essentially have the Torah that he uses at all times, and another one that is protected, that is stored in a safe place, that is away from the people. It is based Gnazov, and it is at a place where people hardly see. It's in an area which is not accessed by people, and so therefore, the letters will never fade. It will not be exposed to the elements of the day. Every once in a while, and perhaps more often than not, the king will go back and will compare the Sefer Torah that he has in his hands, the Sefer Torah that he carries with him all the time when interacting with other people, and make sure that it still matches up. Make sure that it's not all that different than the Sefer Torah that he has been, that has remained in the base Gnazov at all times. This is the responsibility of the king, to see to it that he leads, that he interacts with the people, is guided through Torah, but at the same time make sure that the letters of that Torah do not fade over the course of time. In really half hour from now, at least where I am, the month of Elul is set to begin. Today is the first day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, but of course it is not yet the month of Elul. Rosh Chodesh Elul, the beginning of Elul, is a very special time of year. It is a time in year in which we anticipate with great excitement, hopefully, the beginning of a new year, a year which hopefully brings the promise for growth, the opportunities for improvement, and each and every one of us look to become better people. And as we find ourselves at the end of the year, so it's a good time to sort of start to take a look and compare the Sefer Torah, if you will, that we take with us all the time. the Sefer Torah that we use with our interactions with other people, in our conversations with other people, the Sefer Torah that we use to guide us as we make some very difficult decisions and have to try to help people sometimes when they are in a very difficult and challenging place, and compare that sort of real Sefer Torah, if you will, to the ideal, to one that is untainted, to the one that represents not the world in which it is, but the world in the way that it should be. And the month of Elul is a very, very great, opportune, auspicious time to do this sort of realignment, in which we go ahead and we get a sense of where we are, and particularly where am I relative to where I was a year ago during the Aseret Semei Tshuva. Have I drifted? If so, in which way? And how do I find my way back? And being able to hold on to that ideal Sefer Torah that is placed, like the king places it Bebeis Ganazav in his treasure house, and to take it out now and sort of compare it with the Sefer Torah that I've been carrying around with me all throughout the year is a very, very powerful metaphor as to how it is that we can effectively change in a way which allows us to grow in accordance with the real and the ideal expectations of the Torah. So therefore, I'll end the way I started. I started with an apology that my title was a little misleading. I spoke about the Torah's double standard. The Torah doesn't have double standards the way we use that expression, but the Torah does have a double standard. The standard is Mishnei HaTorah Hazos. You need not one, but two Sifrei Torah. And while it is true on a simple level that really only applies to the king, I think there's a very, very powerful message that each and every one of us can learn from this. I wish each and every one of you, first of all, a good Shabbos and a good Chodesh, a Chodesh Tov. It should be a good month, a month of growth, a month of progress. And Be'ezras Hashem, we will continue to learn together and grow together as we come closer to the end of the year. And with great excitement, we anticipate the start of the new year, Be'ezras Hashem, in 1 month from now. Thank you very much to everyone. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and as always, thank you for joining me.